Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome. Today I'll talk about 4 U.S. presidents: Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, James Buchanan, and Abraham Lincoln. Millard Fillmore was the 13th U.S. president. He served from 1850 to 1853. Born in the Finger Lakes country of New York in 1800, Fillmore as a youth endured the privations of frontier life. He worked on his father's farm and at 15 was apprenticed to a cloth dresser. He attended one-room schools and fell in love with the red-headed teacher Abigail Powers, who later became his wife. Fillmore presided over the Senate during the months of nerve-wracking debates over the Compromise of 1850. He made no public comment on the merits of the compromise proposals, but a few days before President Taylor's death, he intimated to him that if there should be a tie vote on Henry Clay's bill, he would vote in favor of it. Thus, the sudden accession of Fillmore to the presidency in July 1850 brought an abrupt political shift in the administration. Taylor's cabinet resigned and President Fillmore at once appointed Daniel Webster to be Secretary of State, thus proclaiming his alliance with the moderate Whigs who favored the compromise. A bill to admit California still aroused all the violent arguments for and against the extension of slavery without any progress toward settling the major issues. As the Whig Party disintegrated in the 1850s, Fillmore refused to join the Republican Party, but instead in 1856 accepted the nomination for president of the Know-Nothing or American Party. Throughout the Civil War, he opposed President Lincoln and during Reconstruction supported President Johnson. He died in 1874. Franklin Pierce was the 14th U.S. president. He served from 1853 to 1857. Born in Hillsborough, New Hampshire, in 1804, Pierce attended Bowdoin College. After graduation, he studied law, then entered politics. At 24, he was elected to the New Hampshire legislature. 2 years later, he became its speaker. During the 1830s, he went to Washington first as a representative, then as a senator. 2 months before he took office, he and his wife saw their 11-year-old son killed when their train was wrecked. Grief-stricken, Pierce entered the presidency nervously exhausted. In his inaugural, he proclaimed an era of peace and prosperity at home and vigor in relations with other nations. The United States might have to acquire additional possessions for the sake of its own security, he pointed out, and it would not be deterred by any timid forebodings of evil. By the end of his administration, Pierce could claim a peaceful condition of things in Kansas. But to his disappointment, the Democrats refused to renominate him, turning to the less controversial Buchanan. Pierce returned to New Hampshire, leaving his successor to face the rising fury of the sectional whirlwind. He died in 1869. Jane Means Appleton Pierce was his spouse. James Buchanan was the 15th U.S. president. He served from 1857 to 1861. He was the only president who never married. Presiding over a rapidly dividing nation, Buchanan grasped inadequately the political realities of the time. Relying on constitutional doctrines to close the widening rift over slavery, he failed to understand that the North would not accept constitutional arguments which favored the South. Nor could he realize how sectionalism had realigned political parties. The Democrats split, the Whigs were destroyed, giving rise to the Republicans. Born into a well-to-do Pennsylvania family in 1791, Buchanan, a graduate of Dickinson College, was gifted as a debater and learned in the law. As president-elect, Buchanan thought the crisis would disappear if he maintained a sectional balance in his appointments and could persuade the people to accept constitutional law as the Supreme Court interpreted it. The court was considered the legality of restricting slavery in the territories, and 2 justices hinted to Buchanan what the decision would be. Sectional strife rose to such a pitch in 1860 that the Democratic Party split into northern and southern wings, each nominating its own candidate for the presidency. Consequently, when the Republicans nominated Abraham Lincoln, it was a foregone conclusion that he would be elected even though his name appeared on no Southern ballot. Rather than accept a Republican administration, the Southern Fire-Eaters advocated secession. President Buchanan, dismayed and hesitant, denied the legal right of states to secede, but held the federal government legally could not prevent them. He hoped for compromise, but secessionist leaders did not want compromise. Then Buchanan took a more militant tack. As several cabinet members resigned, he appointed Northerners and sent the Star of the West to carry reinforcement to Fort Sumter. On January 9, 1861, the vessel was far away. Buchanan reverted to a policy of inactivity that continued until he left office. In March 1861, he retired to his Pennsylvania home, Wheatland, where he died 7 years later, leaving his successor to resolve the frightful issue facing the nation. Abraham Lincoln was the 16th U.S. President. He served from 1861 to 1865. The son of a Kentucky frontiersman, Lincoln had to struggle for a living and for learning. 5 months before receiving his party's nomination for president, he sketched his life. I was born February 12, 1809, in Hardin County, Kentucky. My parents were both born in Virginia of undistinguished families, second families, perhaps I should say. My mother, who died in my 10th year, was of a family of the name of Hanks. My father removed from Kentucky to Indiana in my 8th year. It was a wild region with many bears and other wild animals still in the woods. There I grew up. Of course, when I came of age, I did not know much. Still, somehow, I could read, write, and cipher. But that was all. Lincoln warned the South in his inaugural address. In your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war. The government will not assail you. You have no oath registered in heaven to destroy the government, while I shall have the most solemn one to preserve, protect, and defend it. Lincoln thought the secession illegal and was willing to use force to defend federal law and the Union. When Confederate batteries fired on Fort Sumter and forced its surrender, he called on states for 75,000 volunteers. 4 more slave states joined the Confederacy, but 4 remained within the Union. The Civil War had begun. As president, he built the Republican Party into a strong national organization. Further, he rallied most of the Northern Democrats to the Union cause. On January 1, 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation that declared forever freed of slaves within the Confederacy. Lincoln won re-election in 1864 as Union military triumphs heralded an end to the war. In his planning for peace, the president was flexible and generous, encouraging Southerners to lay down their arms and join speedily in a reunion. The spirit that guided him was clearly that of his second inaugural address, now inscribed on one wall of the Union Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds. On Good Friday, April 14th, 1865, Lincoln was assassinated at Ford's Theater in Washington by John Wilkes Booth, an actor who somehow thought he was helping the South. The opposite was the result, for with Lincoln's death, the possibility of peace with magnanimity died. He was married to Mary Todd Lincoln. Thank you for watching. See you in the next episode. Prezi signing out. Bye.